Make every night a wonderful journey, no matter where you are. Good night, sweet dreams. The first story, Resplendent Files No. 1. A hero can't stand up for something without making enemies. Passion comes hand in hand with fear, and as long as these records exist, there will be enemies. Being cautious is a requirement when taking upon this duty, for fear is not known by God, because he fears no one. So fear is a power of the Dark Prince, the one prowling around like a lion, ruling over a realm filled with fire and the gnashing of teeth. Excerpt from Resplendent Files. Introduction. Being that I am breaking Catholic law by sharing what has been confessed to me, and what has been confessed to earlier generations before me, please do not let it be on your mind when you whisper this down the lane. I take all blame for this obscenity against the statutes placed before me. I cannot disclose much of information about myself, like my name, location, or workplace, but I will divulge into a bit about myself. I am a 21-year-old intern at a Catholic church. As odd as it sounds, Catholic churches do need interns. To put my work into basic terms, I make calls and send letters to neighboring churches and sometimes organize the archives. I was actually forced into this job by my parents. They basically run my life it. It's not like I want them to though. They just kinda keep me under close surveillance no matter where I go. They had arranged my marriage before I was born, just another thing they control. Her name is, well, I shouldn't exactly broadcast that over the internet either, so let's call her Carolyn. Carolyn doesn't want anything to do with me. She even moved for states away from me just to show me how much she hates me. My parents won't allow me to find another bride, and her parents won't allow her to find another groom, so we are sort of stuck. I don't blame her though, for leaving. I've been an alcoholic for 4.5 years, and all I'm good at is writing. Trying to get a job being a writer is the hardest thing on this earth. All people want to read is fantasy or crime novels. I applied for a job at a newspaper once and they wanted me to write articles on sports. I'm not one to follow teams, so when they said that's what I was to do, I quit. To be honest, I have no idea what I want to write as a career. For now though, I believe my talents are being called upon to make something this important public. I'm not sure what is making me want to put this here, and here of all places I'm not sure, but something inside me says to do it, and so I will. Now earlier you may have noticed I was breaking Catholic jurisdiction by announcing what has been confessed to me, and yet I am only an intern. Well, let me start from the beginning. I was told to make one last call to a church and ask how they were doing and to see what to pray for. Now the father who told me to do this didn't realize that I was quite wasted. When I thought he was out of earshot, I called the church and told them that underneath their church was a shrine dedicated to Cholula, and that if they didn't all start to perform rituals on dispelling any demons roaming inside their walls, terrible things might happen. This is when I heard yelling from the sanctuary. Not a normal yell, mind you. A yell that makes your body shudder and become paralyzed, just like from a nightmare. I told the man to hang up before any roaming entities noticed the phone line and squeezed their way through to the church I was in. I felt accomplished for a successful troll within the same second he hung up. I heard that awful yelling again, still coming from the auditorium, but as the sound flew through that building, it felt like it was rushing into the room I was in. Once the sound hit me, I felt paralyzed again. Even if I could move, I didn't want to. I felt like the slightest movement would alert whatever creature yelled that I was still here. and that it would tear through everything in its path to get at me. So I sat there for a good 10 minutes or so. I never realized how many sounds ring throughout a building until that moment, with all the different pitches and tones bouncing off everything placed in a room. You could mistake a building for being a living, breathing thing. I finally arose from my seat, grabbed my bag, and went out to the auditorium to find no one there. Sweat had formed its way into every pore of my skin, almost like a protective armor against everything and an adjunct to all of my abilities. Why I would think sweat has those capabilities, I'm not sure. Think of it this way though. When a man is in a desert and is dehydrated to the point of death, he will look for any substance to stand in, for the raw water has abandoned. His own piss is now his source of refreshment. My own sweat is my source of protection, though just as piss didn't fully do the job for him, neither did my sweat. My knees clattered together. My head felt full of glass shattered by the bullet that was my thoughts of horror, and my car keys were left on the desk. I felt turning back could only make me go even more down the drain with what had been going on. Before I headed back, I laid my stuff on one of the seats, and as soon as I turned to head for my desk, the yelling began. This time, it didn't originate anywhere except from the center of my head. I began sprinting toward my desk with each and every step I took. There was a heavy sound of metal clanging against itself, and it became louder and louder, to the point my ears popped. The feeling of warm crimson poured from my ears down my neck. I was unable to hear any more fear arose in me. How was I to know if something were behind me? My desk was now in sight. I began running faster, but over it and hid in the only safe haven I could think of, underneath the desk. I shut my eyes, but I could still see. I tried to hold my breath in fear of something hearing me breathing, but I couldn't stop panting. I began to feel claustrophobic, and my body began to shut down. A little bit of light shone through under the bottom of the desk, and my eyes picked it up. The shadows appeared and began to move. I expected the legs of a person, though my mind said otherwise. I continued to remain still. I then heard my name called. My whole body staggered back into itself, and my eyes registered as shut. I bumped my head getting out from underneath my desk, though I was cautious as I moved. I answered the father. I recognized his voice. Here is what I remember from my conversation with him. To better follow my conversation with the father, we shall call him Father Jeremiah. What are you doing under there? Father Jeremiah asked, bewildered. Oh, sorry. I was just trying to reach for my pencil, I answered as I began standing up. All right then. How did the conversation with Father Name Removed go? He picked up some papers knocked onto the floor. It must have fallen off when I helped the desk. He said to pray that his affair won't become public, and that you should pay him back his $20. I was still wasted. Father Jeremiah laughed quite a bit, and then asked if I had anything to confess. Every time I joke around with him, he asks me that. I looked him in the eye and told him, if I had anything to confess to you, it would be about you. He met my gaze with a stare that cannot be described other than villainous. It was full and messy. At the same time, my heart sank when he said to follow him. I walked with him to the confession box, and he walked into the side where usually someone who needs to confess walks into. I was sort of confused at first. Then I realized he wanted to confess something to me. I guess he thought there wasn't another way for me to listen to him, unless it was in the confines of these cubes. So I walked into the opposing box and got comfortable. I sat there for 15 minutes waiting for him to say something to me. I began nodding off. The alcohol was putting me to sleep. You're a unique person, you know that? I became somewhat alert now, but still very much dazed. You have the talent to put the pen on the paper and convince people things are real. You can take someone's mind and make them believe up is down, left is right. The moon is a star that has quite the talent, my boy. My eyes were now half open. I was in a trance still, blankly staring at the darkest corner of the room. I used to write like you. I wouldn't even have to think about a story to write it. The pen seemed to free float and just spew out words of a world only some could imagine, but only I could explain. I heard him situate. One day, though, I couldn't write anymore. I had lost it completely. My pens didn't spew out stories. Only words that meant nothing to me or those around me. I now was intrigued and was listening intently. He continued. The only words I could write were words about how I hated my words. The words I wrote about hatred I hated more than the words I hated. I hate them, and I hate it. He was now heavily breathing by this point, and he seemed to be stuttering every word he said. I was slightly on edge now. His tone of voice didn't seem that of a father or the church, and neither did his words. I wrote one last thing, though, he said after quite a while. Calm now. I don't hate this piece. Honestly, I love it more than I love myself. It has reached the point where it can no longer become greater, because it is already too great. He paused. But to find that greatness, I had to create something awful, something gruesome, horrendous, disgusting, abominable, hideous. He lost me at this point. Isn't possible to create beauty without pain? I thought. I soon found out what he meant, though. Father Jeremiah situated again, and then resumed. You ever notice the Bible is a love letter from God to his chosen people? And yet within that love letter, we find horrific stories strewn throughout the book of Judges. Brother killed brother, people abandoned others at one point. A man chops up his concubine and sends her parts to the other tribes of Israel. If it wasn't bad enough that he had a concubine, he had to then tear her body apart and spread the sections to everyone. I didn't really catch his point yet, but he wasn't finished. He sighed. I probably lost you here. Let me get to my point. The Bible is pure and perfect, but just as it tells of pure goodness, it tells of also what is awful in our world. I took this and applied it to my lack of writing and thought, if I want to write something great, I need to write something awful as well. He stopped. We sat there for another 15-minute wait. I was determined not to nod off. I was absorbed into his story, still awaiting the confession. What I have written, he paused to take a deep breath, is of my life. Yep, I died a little inside. I thought it was gonna be something like, actually as I typed this and I had no idea what it would have been, but I knew it shouldn't be so anticlimactic. The things I wrote are filed away in the archives of our church. They are titled the Resplendent File. I wrote them 15 years ago, and I want you to read them. I want you to criticize them and tell me what they are like. I want to know what you think of my thoughts and my life and tell me I did something right. He stepped up, brushed off his pants, and walked out. I sat there thinking to myself, what? I didn't feel like moving, to be honest. I was quite comfortable. I slept there for about an hour before some Spanish cleaning lady began throwing foreign curses at me to get out. I remembered about the files Father Jeremiah asked me to read, and so I went to grab my bag and head to the archives. To my surprise, the files were sitting on my bag already. I picked them up and put them in my bag, hoisted the bag over my shoulders. It was at this moment I remembered something. I still don't have my keys. I practically crawled to my desk. Thankfully, nothing happened. I grabbed them and began to drive home. On the ride home, there was almost no traffic. It was about 11 p.m., and the lights of the passing cars began to give me a migraine. I took a quick stop at a gas station and filled my tank up. When it finished, I went into the mini-mart and decided to grab a candy bar for some energy. When I grabbed the bar, I felt needles pierce my hand, and I dropped the bar on the ground. It broke, and my hand was now stained with blood. I went to the counter to ask for something to cover my hand, and the teenage boy at the cash register asked why. I shoved my hand in his face and yelled to him that's why. He confessed to me he had no idea what I was talking about, all while my hand was just pouring out onto his face. I couldn't believe my eyes, and I just covered them with my arms and stood at the counter for about a minute. I could hear the uneasy breaths of the boy. I uncovered my eyes and nothing was there. Blood was not covering his face, and my hand had no evidence of ever being pierced. I asked the kid where the nearest bar wasn't. He told me to go about 3 miles down the road and I hit one. I walked out the store and went to my car while sitting in the driver's seat. I checked my mirrors to make sure I wasn't going to hit anyone. Looking through my rearview mirror, I saw someone in my back seat. A man with his ears missing, fluids and brain matter leaked through the gaping holes, and he started to beg me to take him to a doctor. I couldn't look away, or do anything for that matter. My body rejected all commands. As he spoke, he began to deteriorate. I heard a knocking on my window, and turned and saw someone giving me the finger and telling me to move. I looked back through the reverie and no one was there. That armor of sweat came back, and I was so ready to waste away. I pulled out of the gas station and drove to my destination of salvation. Once there, I can't say what happened, because I don't remember. Now I'm sitting at a public cafe, hiding my vodka in one of those coffee thermoses and typing this up. What I've read so far has not been very great, like Father Jeremiah stated. I posted the introduction because that seemed to be the only enticing and well-written thing so far. I do not feel like typing up the whole first article, but I will provide a concise edition. Resplendent Files. Article 1 Concise Edition. Years 125. Father Jeremiah born August 3rd, 1947. His father came home from being in WWI. and died in 1950 due to a wound from his service. His mother never remarried. She died in 1964. Father Jeremiah apparently was an excellent student with consistent high grades, even though he seemed to be bullied his entire school life. Says that his grades dropped dramatically in his junior year in high school, probably due to his mother's death. This prevented him from being accepted to high-end colleges. Between the ages of 19 and 23, he joined and soon became the leader of a cult named Resplendent, whose worship was still of the God of Abraham, but their belief in how to be redeemed was that of pure fear under God. When he turned 24, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia, ending his reign as the leader of the cult Resplendent. He has had to take pills and have monthly checkups since then, and it says he has had to increase his dosage since then. It is now 6, the original amount prescribed to him. And Article 1 Concise Edition. A father of the church who originally was a cult leader. Guess he couldn't leave the robes and worship behind. Still, his schizophrenia problem is quite interesting. I wonder if he sees people who left the church years ago still at Mass. Either way, there is a lot to read here, and I don't have enough vodka to keep me thinking straight. Next time I find anything of importance or new, I will type something up and inform those who are still interested. Remember, it shouldn't stay on your mind if you hear about this. I am the one breaking the rule, not you. And those horrific things I've been seeing, I can't get them out of my head. Even as I type this, I sometimes see blood leaving my fingers onto the keys of my laptop. It's probably just because of this drink, or maybe I don't have enough of it. Nameless. 9/30/2011. Next entry. Resplendent files no. To the second story. Jeremy's toy. I worked for an old toy company in southern Missouri. One of the people on the assembly line, my part was just adding the final touches to the toys. So basically, I was the back of the pack due to the recent economic troubles. One day I got notice that I was fired from my job. I wasn't really devastated. Because of the hardship, I really was expecting it. As I was saying, I was packing up my things to leave when suddenly, in the parking lot, while I was strolling towards my light red Chevrolet, I almost tripped over a bump in the lot. I looked back to see what was in my way, and there on the black concrete, sizzling from the summer heat, was a toy. I picked it up. It was still in the plastic container, and the cardboard outsiding. There was no label saying who made it or the name of the item. It was just a doll with black hair, dark green button eyes, a white shirt, and black jeans. Hesitantly, I put the doll in my brown leather suitcase, dropped it in the back seat of my Chevrolet, and drove off, not knowing of the misfortunes to come. I lived in a small neighborhood. We called it the Creek, due to the nearby river flowing with its sparkling, silky blue water. I lived in a modest story home with a garage, just your normal American home. I have a wife named Donna and a son named Jeremy. We were your normal, average family to say the least. I pulled up into my normal-sized garage filled with tools and whatnot. I opened the door with grace, and then, soon Jeremy came running towards me at full force. "Daddy, Daddy," he said. "I'm so glad you're home." Jeremy was just 6 years old. He had blonde hair and blue gleaming eyes. He was wearing an orange shirt with small blue jeans and black and white sneakers. Hey son, I have a surprise for you," I announced. "Oh. What is it, Daddy?" Jeremy said with excitement in his eyes. "Well, my dear Jeremy, it is a brand new toy," I exclaimed, and out I pulled was the doll with the green buttoned eyes. "Ooh," Jeremy said as he pulled the toy away from with great force. "Where did you get it, Daddy?" Jeremy questioned me. "I got it at the toy factory." "For you, my dear Jeremy. After all, you are my son," I said with a brief chuckle. "I love you, Dad," Jeremy said as he ran to his room to play with the innocent toy. Or at least that's how I viewed it then. I decided not to tell my family about the firing, since it would upset them dearly. Luckily, tomorrow was Saturday, the start of the weekend, so they would not question why I would not be going to work. The evening of Friday started out pretty normal and average for us. Dinner at 600, family time at 630, and anything else after that. At about 830, I noticed Jeremy's behavior becoming a little unusual. He started talking to the doll, which I dismissed as what a normal child would do with an active imagination. But then he started saying that the doll was talking back to him. That was a little stranger, but again, I dismissed it as imagination. Our family went off to sleep at 9:30, into our own dreams and imaginations. It would have been about 300 in the morning. I heard a blood-curdling scream, and it startled me, and then out of bed we ran as fast as the wind to Jeremy's room. We tried to open the door, but it was locked. It seemed to be barricaded from the other side. After 10 minutes of endless banging and screaming, the door suddenly swung open and we rushed in, only to find out that Jeremy was fast asleep and dreaming. We wondered where the scream came from. And then I noticed that the doll was at my feet. It was very odd, because part of the doll's white shirt had turned red, a vicious red. I dismissed this as a food stain. I really wish I didn't. We woke into the early hours of the Saturday morning. The birds chirping in the oak trees. We started our morning with breakfast. The contents of the breakfast were cereal, orange juice, toasted bread with butter on it, and an omelette. Jeremy seemed a little different this time, disoriented, and his temper was more noticeable throughout the day. He became more and more disoriented, and at angry he was carrying the doll with him all the time. Each time we tried to take it away from him, he would seem to hiss and grab it back with tremendous force that seemed almost strong enough to almost knock you over. He became more independent also, becoming obsessed with the doll, the wretched doll. Why did it do this? Sorry for that. Back to the story. Through the evening, Jeremy would not speak a single word to us. He would let it all out to the doll. The doll, which he named and drew, seemed like he was possessing him, taking control, becoming his master. That Saturday night, we drifted off into our dreamlands, when, like the night before, a blood-curdled scream woke us up again. This time it sounded more powerful, should I say. Immense? No. Anyway, like the night before, the door to Jeremy's room was blocked, this time with more things than last, and it took us 15 minutes to get in Jeremy fast asleep once more. But the room was messier, papers scattered everywhere, as my foolishness caused me to dismiss so many things at this time. I thought of it as Jeremy's growing temper. I picked the doll up, and this time the vicious red of its white shirt had grown. It was half full. I thought that Jeremy probably colored it that way. Me and Donna went back to our bedroom, slipped into our bed, and drifted off, coming to on Sunday. On that particular Sunday, it was the Hallows Eve. The creek was decorated with carved pumpkins, bright lights, and other fancy decorations for Halloween. Jeremy this time was noticeably different. His hair was messier, his shirt ragged, and his sneakers had holes in the front. He was very aggressive this time. He would not come in 5 feet of us. If we did of him, he would scream. A scream that was very unusual. It was like it was another voice. It seemed as though something was inside him, just waiting to burst out. About 8:30 at night, 30 minutes before bedtime, Donna went into the living room, where Jeremy was in a corner, speaking to that horrid doll. I was in the bedroom, reading a book, the particular book being Child Abnormalities by J.A. Alston. I was reading every inch to see what had happened to my precious Jeremiah. It was 20 minutes after reading the book that I heard a powerful scream, a scream of terror, and it was Donna's. I suddenly rushed to the living room, where, surprisingly, no one to be found. I searched every single inch of this house, and Jeremy and Donna could not be found. I was about to call 911 when an unseen force hit me and I fainted. I woke up to what was the attic of our two-story home. I was tied to a pole in the attic, and in that room there were 3 dead bodies. Each one was decapitated, and the heads were all placed on spears, which I immediately recognized as my wife, and the other 2 were dogs. Blood was spilled everywhere. Some was on the walls, some had pooled on the floor, and the guts of Donna and the dog strewn about as parts of their bodies were cut open or off. Suddenly, a candle was lit, and a shrieking laugh sounded, and I saw Jeremy and the doll in one hand. Jeremy was holding the doll, and in the other hand, Jeremy was holding a candle with its wax running down the side, and a blood-stained knife. "Jerry, I said before being cut off by inhuman voice, do not say a word, mortal," it said, "for your little Jeremy is gone, gone in the deep depths of the underworld, being lost in my possession. Youlittlefre. I said before being cut off when the possessed Jeremy lunged at me, and I blacked out again. I woke in a hospital. I had severe scratches all over my body. The doctor said a neighbor found me in my backyard in this condition. To this day, I am still recovering from my injury. I can still hear the last words my son said when he was normal, repeating over and over each night. It echoes in my head, with my thoughts of the doll still watching me as I sleep. The voice says, "I love you, Daddy. I love you, Daddy. I love you, Daddy. I love you, Daddy, why?" The third story. Hooties. I'm stuck in a barren wasteland. The water is an undrinkable mud bath. The soil is almost a rock. Nothing growing in the cracks. The sun is unbearably hot. I think back to before my capture, before I was forced here by them. I was driving down the interstate. Everything perfectly normal. I was listening to my favorite music, humming along. I was going to a far-off job interview. I was making great time, and my head was filled with the joyous thoughts of finally having work. Then they came. When I encountered the first of them, I was a little unnerved, but not terrified or anything. I still remember the first one I saw. A hooded figure, his face completely concealed. He was standing in one of those patches of concrete-contained grass you always find on highways and such. He was holding a sign that read, "You are nearing damnation." I didn't think too terribly much about it, just some nutcase, I told myself, but that was far from the end of it. After a while, I saw another holding an identical sign. The only thing different about him was that his hoodie was a darker shade of grey. I just tried to ignore it, but they kept appearing, each with a slightly darker hoodie. I was a little scared at this point. Was this some kind of mass prank or protest? As I neared my destination, I was glad to be getting off the highway. There was only one tunnel left and I would be on the more backstage roads. I hadn't seen any more of the hooded figures, so I was starting to calm down. As I neared the tunnel, I saw another hoodie wearer on the grass patch right next to the tunnel. This one was different, though his hoodie was complete black. But the most striking thing was that he had his hood down. He was a mostly normal-looking young man. He had dirty blonde hair that looked somewhat matted up. His eyes were a fairly striking shade of green. He seemed moderately pale, but nothing out of the ordinary. The only weird thing about him were his pupils, which were heavily dilated, like he was on drugs or something. His sign was also different. It said "damnation" at the end of tunnel. I was a bit fearful now. But I managed to shrug off those feelings of superstition and drove through the tunnel. I really wish I hadn't. I drove through the tunnel for what seemed like hours. My car's clock had stopped as soon as I entered the tunnel, and I had to turn off my radio because I was getting nothing but static. I finally saw a distant light at the end of the tunnel. I drove through, hoping for an end to the madness. I drove into what looked like some sort of desert. The road was blocked off for construction. When I got out of my car to take a look at the other side, I soon found that there was no other side of the road. It just sort of ended. There were little oases scattered about everywhere for what seemed like miles. I went up to examine one and found the water to be far too muddy and stagnant to drink. I still see them list, and in the middle of the mud oases, they have their hoods down now. All of them, every little oasis, as its own hooded partner. The scary part is that they all look normal, and they're all different. Every one of them, some are men, some are women, some look to be in their late 30s. Others look as young as 12 or 13. They just stand there, swaying their hips from side to side, as if waiting cosily. The only weird thing about them is their dilated pupils.